Welcome back to my channel. I am trying a different place today. I'm talking to you from my backyard here in sunny Florida. So today I want to talk to you about inflation. And I want to talk about it from my point of view as an entrepreneur who is either involved in many businesses or invested in different businesses. And I want to give you kind of my perspective. So I live about 30, 40 miles north of Miami. And I moved here about 5 years ago from Midwest, like a lot of other people got this bright idea. And what I experienced here, my family's experience here, is a tremendous rise in prices, like many of you, I think, across the country. But I think South Florida, Florida in general, Texas were the kind of the epicenter of this rise, right? Again, I'm not going to rehash. I think many of you people know, but I know we have some viewers from other countries. So I'm just going to briefly rehash what happened here, business-wise and economy-wise in the last 5 years. During COVID, right? Economy was shut down. And basically, Federal Reserve pumped trillions of dollars into the economy twice, right? And it just basically flooded the whole system with money. Money ended up in consumers' hands, and which represents 70% of American GDP, and they started spending this money. There was a lot of other schemes to help small businesses, PPP loans, all kinds of other grants and SBA loans, AIDL loans, all this kind of stuff. So that really, flooded. There's no other word to describe it. Flooded the economy with money, and people started buying cars, new cars, used cars, started moving, started traveling, and so forth, so on. At the same time, we had a limited supply of workers available, so it started pushing the prices of labor higher. So an example would be when just to give you just few data points here on both goods and services. I would say, a cup of coffee 5 years ago cost $2.50. I'm talking about latte, maybe $3. Now it's $6, $7. Same cup, 12 ounces. Bread, $2.50. Now it's $4.50. Eggs, the famous subject, went from $2.50 to probably $7, $8. Rent went from $1,500 for one bedroom in Miami area to about $3,000. So it's really becoming expensive here. And I want to talk about what is happening right now, how it happened, and what we probably might expect in the future, and how will it all end. I think you guys are wondering, how will it all end? How does inflationary wave will affect you, affect the economy, affect the world, because the implications are global. So I want to talk about, there are 7 stages to typical inflation wave. It starts with money printing by a federal bank, which happened during COVID. Jerome Powell kind of tried to prop the economy during unprecedented crisis, but I think he kind of overdid it twice, right? So there was in 2020, and then another stimulus was in 2021. Trillions of dollars were distributed. That caused a rise in prices, right? So we saw that assets that are based kind of like, they cannot be moved to other countries, homes, cars, stocks, Bitcoin, anything just inflated to kind of like historic highs. That was going on from 2020, 2021, 2022. 2022, finally, Jerome Powell, chairman of Federal Reserve, started playing catch up, right? He realized that he was late, but he was a very timid few steps there. He just increased the rates by a little bit, and inflation just kept rising and rising. That was causing a wage spiral, right? People could not, start things that expensive, rent, cars, travel, food started getting more and more expensive. People were going back to their bosses, to their employers, and were asking for raises. So that kind of started one of the reasons that kind of intensified the spiral, right? And the bosses seeing that the salaries went up, they had to increase the prices they charge for their goods and services. So they just kept kind of like one wave reinforcing the other. Finally, in 2022, 2023, end of those years, the Federal Reserve started really aggressively pushing the prices and kind of rising them to 30-year high. That has maybe slowed some of the demand, and now the 6th stage of the inflationary wave started, which is called, and we're living through it right now, it's called demand destruction and recession. Basically, when people can no longer afford the goods and services, they start spending less. And kind of by my calculation, basically, The salaries have increased in the last 5 years on only about 20% on average, versus the prices, if you include, rental, car, insurance, home insurance, have increased by close to 100%, including food as well. Food, care, healthcare, personal services, and travel. Right, so we're facing this massive gap between what the salaries are, by how much they increased in the last 5 years, versus where the actual cost of living is. And everybody's experienced it. I have cousins in Europe, in Germany. They tell me they experience similar things, maybe to a lesser extent. But here that's what's happening. So we are facing right now, we're facing demand destruction and possible recession. Now, all this was happening before the tariffs, right? That kind of, I'm recording this at the end of April. Tariffs, Trump's tariffs. I don't know if you guys have been living, on a different planet, but basically in the last 3 weeks, our president decided to raise the tariffs on our foes and friends and foes alike. If it doesn't matter if it's Canada or if it's Mexico or if it's our European friends, together with China. Interesting that Russia is exempt. This is an interesting one from tariffs. But that definitely is not going to help the economy and the country. I think it's going to actually exacerbate the inflation, and it's going to cause a shock that's going to tip the economy, our economy, and probably the world economy, into the recession, potentially deep recession. So, kind of my outlook as I talk to different business leaders or friends with different businesses and various parts of the world, they're foreseeing kind of like contraction in demand. Nervous suppliers canceling orders, builders are stopping to build, bankers are really less likely to lend out money. So there's a lot of concern going on. So let's talk about a couple other ones, maybe 3 or 4 other cycles in the last 100 years and how they ended and what caused them. So the most famous one is the Weimar Germany in 1920s and 1930s, right? The actual cycle was from 1919 to 1923. It was called hyperinflation, right? So, and just to give you an idea, loaf of bread went from 1 mark to 200 billion marks, right? 200 billion, I'm not exaggerating, it's actually, I looked it up online. So basically, what happened then, that reparations after World War I were imposed in Germany, in a very, I would say, very stupid, cruel, and very, very hostile way on Germany. Yes, they started the World War I, but France and England imposed unpayable reparations in the billions of marks on them, and they basically decided to inflate their currency to pay off those debts. And that caused complete devastation, wipeout of middle class, complete devastation of economy, mass unemployment, mass poverty. And this is a developed country, and ultimately led to rise of Hitler and Nazism, World War II, and Holocaust. Okay, so that was kind of maybe the most memorable, the most significant inflation wave in the developed world. We had that wave lasted about 5 years, but it was so severe and so extreme, the repercussions lasted another 10 to 15 years. And we talked about civil unrest inside Germany, and we talked about World War II that was partly caused by inflation. The second example happened in the United States about 50 years ago. So it happened from 1968 to 1982. It's called stagflationary period, right? So, but pay attention, it lasted 14 years, right? From 1968 to 1982, and only finished with a crash, with actually 2 severe recessions in the beginning of the 80s, when Mr. Volcker, Paul Volcker, the Federal Reserve Chairman, rose the rates to 16%, above 16%, and completely crushed the economy. That caused unemployment, deep recession, and ultimately kind of reset the economy. And that's what the last boom, the great boom, investment boom of interest rates declining from 1980s, early 1980s to from 16% to about very close to zero in 2020s. That was that cycle. For 40 years of a boom cycle started with Paul Volcker rising rates and resetting the economy. So we can see there was an economic reset here, a massive economic reset. So, and it kind of started the boom. So we have kind of like very rough 14 years, ending by recession in this case, by deep recession, maybe the deepest at that time since the Great Depression, but it started an economic boom. And finally, Finally, I want to bring in another cautionary tale, and kind of, and we'll talk about where it will apply. Japan, like the 1980s, late 1980s, experienced a tremendous rise in stock market and real estate, and just, you know, and Japanese back in 1980s were what Chinese now are. Basically, you know, people in the United States and all over the world thought they're going to dominate the world, but that did not happen. Their real estate market and their stock market collapsed in a spectacular way, losing, I think, more than 70% of the value, and caused this, they call it lost decades. Not decade, but lost decades. So about 30 years of negative to zero growth and complete collapse. And just now they're beginning to slowly reemerge of this last few years. Japan has been reemerging from this, but again, they don't have the demos, they don't have the demographics to support the economy. So this, I think, Japan is going to slowly kind of limp through. If they have come up with robots, they can maybe replace some labor and maybe help with the seniors, senior care. I think it'll be great. But other than that, I expect really Japan, you know, kind of like slowly limp along. I hear it's a beautiful country, but it's no longer the economic powerhouse it was in 1960s and 1970s and most of 1980s. So what do I kind of foresee for the United States and for the rest of the world? So I do not think we're going to have, you know, Weimar Germany here. I mean, collapse led by you know, a rise of totalitarian leader, as much as it seems now. I know many of you kind of look around, especially if you live in Europe, and you look at our president and you begin to point fingers and you say, oh boy, we've seen this in history before, right? We've seen it maybe in 1930s and 1940s. It's my personal opinion, I do not think so. I do think that it's, I think a lot of things that Trump are doing are wrong and mistaken and go against common sense and any economic theory that I'm aware of. But I think that we're heading for recession, and potentially deep recession in America with repercussions for the dollar status of United States. I think it's going to be really bad for our currency and things are going to become more expensive. And I think we're kind of entering this stagflationary period. So if anything, I think it's going to be a lot more similar to 1970s than to maybe in the United States than to 1920s in Germany. Now, there are a couple of countries out there which, you know, I have relatives in Germany and I go there frequently. It's a beautiful country, great, friendly people. But I think given their demographics and given kind of their heavy reliance on Russian gas, Russian energy, and Chinese consumer, I feel that this country is facing serious problems, and it'll probably may experience something on par with what Japan experienced in 1980. So maybe a lost decade or two. Okay. A second country that is similar to Japan in that sense, to Japan and Germany nowadays, is China. China, despite it appearing to be this powerful empire, it's a communist country. In communist countries, I lived in one. I was born in one. You cannot believe anything that they're saying because it's all about pacifying and appeasing the supreme leader, President Xi. And basically, China is in serious demographic decline, and I do think that the sanctions and the tariffs are really going to knock them down, and that worries me because China still has a powerful military, and it has very serious ambitions about bringing Taiwan back. So if I think about any kind of geopolitical fireworks, I would call them that usually accompany inflationary waves, I'm thinking of China and Taiwan. It potentially kind of China could as it's really been hurt by the tariffs, by Trump's policy, can lash out and really do something unexpected, in terms of it towards Taiwan. So that's kind of my biggest geopolitical worry, I would say. How can we all survive inflation, right? How can we survive this wave? So first of all, let's start with the bad news. The bad news, we probably have a few more tough years ahead of us, and I think it will be different. It will just be like slow sting instead of like a sudden collapse like in 2008 and 9 and 10. I think it's going to be just this stagflationary period in the next maybe 5, maybe 10 years, and I think it's going to end. It's going to end in interest rates rising, just like in 1980s by Paul Volcker, chairman, rising, crushing the economy, serious and very deep recession, and slowly America will emerge in 1930s maybe late 1930s, from this recession. I don't call it depression because I don't think we have better tools and better policy now than in 1930s, but I think we have rough times ahead of us. So that's the bad news. The good news is that every crisis is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to reset yourself personally, to reset your business. I just wanted to remind you, it's a business channel. I'm an entrepreneur, so I think many times like a businessman. Here's a trivia question. When was the most amount of millionaires created in American history? Question. During the Great Depression. Yes, I know, very surprising. So the most amount of millionaires in American history was created during the Great Depression. Look it up. And basically, we're going to have kind of reshuffling of the world order on the outside, but also reshuffling of the American economy with a lot of jobs coming from overseas here. A lot of jobs are maybe going down to Mexico, maybe going down to Colombia, Panama. Basically, whatever used to happen in East Asia, most likely will just be in time. It will take years and maybe decades to rebuild the manufacturing chain here. It will all happen in the countries south of the border. Well, I would say things that can help you is investing in yourself, like I told you in previous videos, is keeping your sanity, meditating, spending time with loved ones, really not overextending yourself financially, stay away from debt, paying down loans, not assuming credit card loans, stuff like this, really being kind of conservative. And and looking for if you are making investments, think of things that are going to be inflation resistant and will keep up the value of your currency, because the government inflation devalues the money, and I think the government will end up printing more money and will devalue the money, and your dollar will buy less. So things like real estate, things like land, things like gold, things like Bitcoin. Again, that's not an investment advice. That's what I'm doing, kind of diversifying my assets. And honestly, I'm also looking at different countries, because I'm no longer sure that dollar is going to be a great store of value going forward. I think people will come up with other alternatives, be it gold, be it Bitcoin, or maybe be it some other currency. So I'm looking to diversify into assets, maybe apartments in other countries, maybe land in other countries, stuff like that. Okay, so guys, hopefully it gives you a kind of understanding where we're at. I wish I had better news, but I think, as I said, every crisis brings an opportunity. So thank you for listening. If you like this channel, please subscribe. Take care.